All right, man, peace. So, brothers, this is going to be part 2 in the latest installment in the series, Black Man, Do You Need Mental Help? Starring none other than Mr. Richard Sherman, the former star cornerback of the Seattle Seahawks and the San Francisco 49ers. Apparently, he may have been placed through some type of alchemical ritual to denote some level of transformation esoterically. Did it spill out of control a little bit, which many of these rituals tend to do? Possibly, who knows? As of right now, we don't quite have enough substantive data to confirm exactly what transpired that night, but where there's smoke, there's fire. I enjoy this show right here a great deal. Speak for yourself, starring Marcellus Wiley and Emmanuel Acho. These two cats right here are not just smart for former athletes. They're not just smart for so-called black men who are former athletes. They're both legitimately intelligent. And they mix very well together because Marcellus Wiley appears to be what I might call a quote-unquote moderate conservative. And I think that Emmanuel Acho is what I might call a quote-unquote moderate liberal. So they fit well together enough, and they have great chemistry. So they respect one another's views, and they're able to have compelling debates without it getting too cantankerous. They really have great chemistry together. And I also think that the age disparity, it amplifies the dynamic of their conversations because they see many issues from two different perspectives, not just based on the polarity of politics, but also based on life experience. So they're going to speak on Mr. Richard Sherman. Of course, they're going to talk about it. I'm going to chime in.
To get started with the latest on Richard Sherman. The video has emerged of Sherman trying to force his way into the front door.
Come through, Ray. Come through, nigga. Peacock call. He said we're doing Oklahoma drills in your front yard, bitch. Come through.
Parents' house. Sherman was arrested Wednesday, but a judge ordered his release without bail Thursday, and he now faces 5 misdemeanor charges. Sherman is scheduled to be in court today. Sherman tweeted about 30 minutes ago, quote, "I am deeply remorseful for my actions on Tuesday night. I behaved in a manner I am not proud of. I've been dealing with some personal challenges over the last several months, but that is not an excuse for how I acted."
Look, man, I don't care how mentally strong or intelligent you are. None of us can deal with every issue on our own. Life is a team game at the end of the day. A lot of it has to do with making sure that you put whatever issues or whatever adversities you're dealing with in the Most High's hands. How do we do that? By making sure that we go through the scriptures and understand which precepts coincide with the situations that we're going through. Learn from the wisdom of the ancients and proceed accordingly. No man is an island. None of us know everything. But when you're in the position where you're constantly being told that you're some type of genius and some super intellectual NFL player, sometimes you can get caught up in your own head in more ways than one, and you end up subscribing to narratives that are not true, such as the notion that we can all solve our own problems. We can't.
Emotional help is extremely real, and I vow to get the help I need. I appreciate all the people who have reached out in support of me and my family, including our community here in Seattle. I am grateful to have such an amazing wife, family, and support system to lean on during this time. So, Acho, what's your reaction to Richard Sherman's arrest?
Firstly, I'm thankful that nobody got hurt. Because if someone got hurt, Marcellus Wiley, this conversation would be entirely different, and how we treated and how we responded to this conversation would be totally different.
I think that that's very relevant and pertinent. No, we have to ask ourselves, why did Richard Sherman feel so desperate and so downcast that he was willing to break into the home of his parent-in-laws and do whatever damage he felt like needed to be done in order to enforce his will on them, knowing that there were going to be repercussions for his actions? Unless at the time he was in such a state of mental disturbance that he was not even cognizant of what he was doing. That level of disassociation a lot of times is indicative of someone who is a very intense drunkard, or maybe the alcoholism was a cover for his psychological breakdown. Due to programming, who knows?
Got hurt, we're able to identify the fact that there are victims on both sides of the door.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure about that. And I'm not crazy about throwing that word victim around too much. Particularly if you're a self-victimizer, I'm not quite sure if you're qualified to call yourself a victim. We have to really make sure that we use appropriate words in their appropriate context. To call Richard Sherman a victim in this situation, to me, that word will only qualify if we could ascertain exactly why he did what he did and what led him down that path. Was it what someone else did to him, or was it what he allowed himself to subscribe to? That's why I say, look, there are 2-dimensional and 3-dimensional evaluations for everything. But if we're going to start the assessment from a 2-dimensional perspective, we have to start with ourselves. And that's why I always hone in on that, particularly with so-called black men. That's how you empower yourself. When you blame yourself for everything that goes wrong, that's how you empower yourself. When you blame others, you empower them. When so-called black people say, this is the so-called white man's fault, that's the so-called white man's fault, this is the black woman's fault, like if so-called black men say that, that's the black woman's fault, or that's that person's fault, you're empowering them over you. Because basically what you're saying is that they have the ability to determine how your life goes based on their consensus opinion. Now, of course, we know in reality, you can go in various environments, corporate America, so on and so forth, where you basically are subject to the whims of others. But once you grasp that you're in control of your future, then you start making better decisions. You start saying things like, you know what, corporate America is geared towards, a certain function. Let me get out of here because it's not conducive to making me the best version of myself. Always blame yourself first. When you do that, you feel empowered. So no, I'm not buying into the notion that Richard Sherman was a victim. If anything, from a 2-dimensional perspective, he's a self-victim of narcissism.
Foremost, inside the door, you have Richard Sherman, who was belligerent, banging on the door. If you haven't seen the video and you have the stomach for it, watch it to have more...
Have the stomach for it? Bro, all it was a dude who was on a bender banging on the door. It wasn't like it was a slasher film.
Conversation. So inside the door, you have Richard Sherman's in-laws. I believe his wife was inside. Maybe her uncle, some people like that. And they are clearly victims of the trauma, having to witness that and go through that.
Yeah.
Have there been violence, and had violence occurred, because Richard Sherman clearly showed up there with bad intentions, we wouldn't be able to understand now also the victim, who is Richard Sherman.
I'm not quite sure about that. As a matter of fact, I think had he gotten through that door, I think that many people would have been even more willing to, to ask themselves and ask Richard why he did what he did. There are many cases of serial killers, mass murderers who are in prison and receive letters every day from women all across the country who are willing to cast them as the sympathetic figure. So I don't necessarily think that had Richard broken through that door, he would have been viewed that far differently from a certain demographic of people who would have been willing to make him the sympathetic figure no matter what he did. But at the end of the day, the term victim does not apply to Richard Sherman, at least not if we're just addressing what transpired on film. If we're going a bit deeper into other avenues, then maybe.
Richard Sherman is a victim, I would say, of pro sports.
Let's go.
This is what I call the entitlement mentality of athletes. And this is why they're not fit to be leaders. You can't be a victim of pro sports if by the age of 21, you're placed in an advantageous position above others. Now you can say, well, you're fast-tracked, so you're never meant to understand life, or you're never allowed to understand life. To whom much is given, much is required. You have to have a team around you that affords you the abilities to grasp what's going on around you, even though you're going down the highway at 100 miles per hour. Whether you're walking down the street or driving down the highway at 100 miles per hour, you're still passing the same things. The only difference is that when you're going 100 miles per hour, it's blurring past you. When you're walking, you get a chance to window shop. You get a chance to go inside different stores and find out what's going on inside. But those same buildings, those same businesses, those same apartments, those same stores are still there. But if you're afforded the luxury of riding in a vehicle that can go that fast, it's still your responsibility to know what's going on around you. No matter what you've been gifted with in your life. So no, Richard Sherman was not a victim of pro sports. He was a victim of himself. And he's supposed to be too smart to get caught up in that. That's all I've heard for the last 7-8 years is how smart this guy is, right? I did a video a long time ago, basically saying that I don't think that Richard Sherman is as smart as the media makes him out to be. But a lot of times the media They're involved in brand building certain assets in the sports industry, already knowing, other narratives, other scripts that are going to transpire down the line.
He's a victim of pro sports in that we overlook so many other issues that people have, and the individual overlooks the issue they have themselves because they are a star, they're a celebrity, they are the cream of the crop in something.
I don't think that anyone's issues get more overlooked than the average man, particularly the average so-called black man. Would Emmanuel Acho be so willing to, quote-unquote, deep dive into this psychological assessment of the average so-called black man that he saw on video trying to break down the door of his baby mother's house? Or would he just say, lock that guy up? When you're Richard Sherman, you're given far more leeway to be destructive and disruptive. So it's really the opposite, and that's why I call it athlete privilege or athlete entitlement. These guys actually think that their lives are copacetic with or simpatico with the lives of the average person, and that people should feel quote-unquote sorry for them because of how many things are thrown at them or thrust their way. I don't begrudge them that. They deserve what they receive because we're in a free enterprise society, a capitalistic society, where the skills that they bring to the table are so rare that they deserve to get paid what they're paid. But then don't come back and call yourself a victim. I don't want to hear that bullshit at all. Because no one feels sorry for, Tyshawn Jenkins from the hood who by 18 years old has to go out to work to help his mother pay the bills. Nobody cares about his stresses. So I don't want to hear about your stresses.
Got mistakes far too often. I watched the movie RESPCT yesterday. Aretha Franklin movie comes out in August. Phenomenal movie. And Aretha Franklin, one of the greatest artists of her time, maybe of all time. First woman, I believe, inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And if you watch the
High Level Witch also. Father High Level Warlock. Also, I believe, a quote-unquote friend of Martin Luther King. No, they were on that quote-unquote Black Baptist circuit all across America, where behind closed doors they would have orgies, private orgies, allegedly.
Play of her life, she had severe issues, alcoholism issues, different violence-related issues. But everyone looked beyond that because she could sing.
Yeah.
See, so many athletes, people look beyond their personal struggles, their emotional struggles, their spiritual struggles.
Right, but those athletes, they all have the revenue to go receive, mental health assistance, psychological support. The average person doesn't have that. Once again, I'm not saying that Acho's point is totally invalid, but it just feeds into the, the narcissistic approach that so many of these professional athletes have towards life. They try to cast themselves as, the same as the average quote-unquote struggling black man. The fact of the matter is that most top-shelf athletes are spotted by the age of 11 or 12. They're afforded great privileges all throughout junior high school and high school. They have a free ride through college, where basically they can bed down any young female that's there. They're receiving money under the table. They're having money sent to their families. They head into the NFL or the NBA anywhere from the age of 19 to 22 years old. And they're having the best of the best, the cream of the crop. Women, cars, houses thrown their way. So they don't get a chance to experience real life. It's okay that you're afforded a lot of those advantages, but then don't come back and talk about how everybody's supposed to understand your plight. Nobody cares. And beyond that, none of those people are fit to be leaders because they have not lived the existence of the people who they claim to be representing. Most of these former so-called black athletes on TV who try to be leaders, they don't even understand what they're talking about. Acho, in and of himself, he's a special case because he participates in what I call African blackface. Basically, when a West African tries to claim the plight of the quote-unquote black American for clout. He does that a lot, especially with that quote-unquote uncomfortable conversations with the Black Man series. It's like, bro, you're not qualified to be the point man or the broker for conversations between so-called blacks and Caucasians in America. You have not lived that life or that existence. You don't have that family history. You're not qualified. You can pull the quote-unquote I'm black card if you want to. But we all know that so-called blacks of the captivity cannot go to Nigeria. They cannot go to Mali. They cannot go to, to Guinea or Zaire or wherever and say, you know what, I'm black, so I should be able to speak upon or speak about or pertaining to what your people are going through. They're going to say it's not about being black, it's about being from here and living here and going through these situations and conditions generation upon generation.
Because they can backpedal and they can play ball. But this incident, we got hit in the head with the reality of, wait a second, y'all, there's more to it than just a game. And let me say this, and I'm going to say this to camera because this is what I remembered most. It's just remember that your occupation is what you do and not who you are. Because if you let your occupation become who you are, then when you no longer do what it is that you do, you will have no idea who you are. And
I agree with a lot of that. You can also tell that he's had some type of oratorical instruction. He speaks like Joel Osteen.
A reminder I ran into right now is like, man, I hope Richard Sherman is not in this dark place because he has confused his occupation, playing football, for who he is. Because now that he is a free agent at 33 years of age and obviously past his prime, he may be running into an identity complex of...
I've never understood why Richard Sherman would not be more open towards playing safety. I think that he would be a splendid safety. As intelligent and knowledgeable pertaining to the game of football as he is, we all know that he's lost at least a step. But his anticipation, his willingness to tackle, I think that he would make a great safety. Or maybe he's willing to do so and some of these other teams are just not willing to give him a chance. Who knows?
Is that he is. He recently said in this post, I have been dealing with some personal challenges over the last several months. I don't know what those personal challenges are, but I do know this.
Most likely related to his woman. 95% of the personal challenges that men go through in life have something to do with a damn woman. Allegedly.
From football is incredibly difficult, regardless of how intelligent you are. I've watched it firsthand with my brother. Just transitioned, just signed a TV deal with over at the 4 letters. My brother's maybe the smartest person I know. I would venture to say probably the smartest athlete to play the game of football over the course of a decade. Right? He won the academic Heisman. Now, Marcellus, you went to Columbia.
I mean, I know we're talking a serious subject, but here's some levity.
You did.
You are looking at me while you say that.
I know.
I know, too. You're right. Columbia covers a lot of ills.
He is a genius.
Nah, he's smart.
He is a genius.
I need some of that.
And even watching him transition, I'm like, yo, it's tough for the smartest person I know, the smartest football player I ever played with. Richard Sherman, we all know how smart he is.
Yeah.
So I'm going to let you...
Being a professional athlete is almost like being a drug addict. That shit is a drug. The amount of adrenaline that they're accustomed to flowing through their veins, because every situation, every down in football is do or die, or in basketball, the cheer of the crowd when you dunk over someone or win a championship. Many athletes have a very difficult time recovering from that, what he calls transition, what I call the death of the athlete. Athletes die twice. One of the few professions where you die twice. In the entertainment industry, oftentimes, they die twice. Sometimes multiple times. If you're a singer, you have your upswings and then your downswings, depending on how popular you are at the moment. But, I always pay attention to, some of these retired athletes, whether it be Michael Jordan, Allen Iverson. It was very obvious to me, at least for a certain period of time, just looking at Michael Jordan's face, that he had substance abuse issues. He might acknowledge them one day, he might not. Of course, what I'm saying is alleged. But we all know about the alcohol. But it was also very obvious to me, just looking at his face, that he was into other things as well. And Allen Iverson, when I look at him, he's another person going through a depressed phase. He still has not moved past. He seems to be a glutton and also an alcoholic. No disrespect to the brother. Once again, just giving my perspective. But the way in which his face is puffed up, how his mouth has curved down, how his eyes normally appear to be downcast and bloodshot, often bloodshot. It's clear that he has an issue dealing with the loss of that rush from the crowd approval.
I've got so much more to say, and I'm excited to hear everything you have to say, but those are my early thoughts.
Man, I'm loving the fact that you started us off like this. This is hella deep. And let's just go back to one of our shared favorite adages. I can impress you by talking about my accomplishments, but I can impact you by talking about my scars. So I'm going to personalize a lot of Richard Sherman's story, whether it was me personally, what I went through in my athletic endeavors, or those I shared that experience with. I'm glad that you brought up that he's a star, because it's a little different when you're a star. As we all know, stars shine. And there's an incomplete sentence that follows when stars shine, because
not only do stars shine, but they're accustomed to being the focus of everyone else's attention. You look up at stars. You admire stars. Many people today, they seek to be stars. And some of these Luciferian ideologies, they say, we come from the stars and things like that. That's really an attempt by man to create this bridge between the celestial sphere and the terrestrial sphere, where they want to go back to that higher level of comprehension. So oftentimes when we call people celebrities, like that term means, basically also means star, or those that dwell in the ceiling, or a star, that's really narcissistic programming. That's narcissism programming, self-worship programming. It's entitlement programming. One of the great scenes in one of my favorite sports movies, Rocky IV, is when Apollo Creed is trying to convince Rocky that they should still consider themselves fighters. And Rocky, he's talking about the fight film that they just watched together, and he's like, Apollo, we can't do that stuff anymore. He said, we're changing. It's like we're turning into regular people. The reason why Sylvester Stallone put that line in the film, it was meant to be, twofold. Not only talking about them as great athletes now becoming regular people, but also those characters, Rocky Balboa or Rocky Balboa and Apollo Creed, they represented gods who were no longer gods. Now they've been humanized. And these professional athletes at the elite level, they consider themselves gods. That's why it's almost embarrassing for many of them to become quote unquote regular people. Like, who am I now? That's why in the film Rocky IV, Apollo, he willingly had himself sacrificed because he no longer wanted to live if he could not live as a god.
A star shine and it blinds others to the reality. It's incomplete because it also blinds that star as well to their own reality. You don't get to fully address all of your issues. Now let's compliment him being a star.
You only don't get to address all of your issues if you believe that you're a god. There are many cases of high-level athletes or celebrities acknowledging that they have a problem. That's the most important thing, is to grasp that you're just a man. That's why Christ tells us, he who exalts himself shall be abased. He who abases or humbles himself shall be exalted. Once you grasp that you're just a man, that's when the Most High will shine even more light on you, and he will guide your path so that you don't get caught up in dumb shit or bullshit. So Richard Sherman, just from a two-dimensional perspective, he's always seemed to be someone who's had issues curbing his ego. In order for you to be great, the ego has to be marginalized. It has to be moderated. It's never going to be destroyed. The ego is necessary. That sense of self-love has to be necessary in order for you to preserve yourself and keep you out of bad situations, to understand when something is below you or beneath you or not of your concern. So the ego is healthy when it's moderated, like anything else. Everything in life has to be moderated.
Of being a football player. And none of this is judgment and indictment on anything or anyone I'm talking about. But I'm just going to give you the picture in totality. When you're a football player, emotionally, it dictates to you this. I don't care how you feel, you better go out there and perform. Okay. When you're a football player, you know that there's a switch. You could be a nice, gregarious, sweet, loving mama's boy at home. And then you get into that locker room and it's time to hit that game field, switch. You better turn it on.
Marcellus Wiley, I have news for you. It's not just on the football field that you have to be able to put your personal feelings aside and do your job. It's not just on the football field where you have to be able to turn on that switch. Regular people do it every day. Regular people wake up and they say, I don't feel like going to work, but they have to get their ass to work because they have responsibilities. They have bills to pay for. You understand what I'm saying? So they're not that different, or they're not as different. When I say they, I'm talking to quote unquote celebrities or professional athletes. They're not as different from common folk as they would like to make themselves believe. The difference is that common folk are accustomed to people not caring about their problems. So they don't have the level of entitlement that professional athletes tend to have. Now, there is an entitlement agenda. There's an entitlement program being, enacted or initiated on the masses at large called Marxism, where basically people are made to believe that no matter how hard they work or don't work, they all deserve the same thing. It's a part of the quote-unquote equality agenda, which makes it extremely insidious. Now, when you're entitled, you start to believe that you deserve what everybody else deserves, and if you don't get it, therefore I'm entitled to take from you. Until in my mind, we're quote-unquote equal. That's what makes Marxism, once again, so insidious and so malicious. But just to get back to the point, so many of these pro athletes, they think that their burden is so singular, and it's not.
Be maniacal to go get the task done for 3 hours. Switch, turn it off. Now, sometimes it gets a little tricky with that switch. Not only between game experiences, but between life experiences. You're talking about transition. I actually have a foundation called Project Transition for that very same reason. It's because the transitions occur so often in our life, but we don't take full notice of all of those fork in the road moments. This is a fork in the road moment for Richard Sherman. Let me juxtapose what happened with Richard Sherman, and thankfully this is all that happened, even though this is pretty damning and damaging. Because if he would have got through that door. Okay.
If he would have got through that door, who the hell knows what might have happened? What might have happened may have been what he wanted to happen. Maybe he wanted to get through that door so that he could sacrifice himself. Once again, is it possible that Mr. Richard Sherman decided that he wanted to go out like a samurai? He wanted to go out on his sword because he was so miserable that he could not play anymore. That in tandem with maybe this being the end of his script. A lot of these rituals that play out, which are pre-scripted, don't always go according to plan. Sometimes the asset does not conduct themselves how they're supposed to. Sometimes the handlers, they might not want to do what is being asked of them. So they just, rewrite the script. Come up with new numerology to make sure that they're able to fulfill the same ritual just in a different way. But Richard Sherman now is definitely someone to watch very closely.
Personalize your story. I played with Junior Seau, and we all know the late, great Junior Seau. A lot of people know his persona in terms of just always fun-loving, always the guy that would carry the water for everybody. And it's true. That was his persona. His personality matched his persona. And there was something about Junior that was super composed, like next level composed. I always said this, and this is before he passed away, that Junior Seau had the greatest amount of talent I've ever seen with the greatest amount of character. I'd never seen somebody that good in something that they did and that great of a person. I never. And I told all the other Hall of Famers I played with the same. But there was a moment when Junior Seau told us all that he needed help. That star was shining, but it was covering up some issues. It's when he ran his car off the cliff. And it was reported, and there's a story talking about the car plunges off the cliff in Carlsbad. And I remember talking to Junior after that, and everybody, people reported in here, his wife, the mayor, everyone is saying, no, that's not Junior, he fell asleep at the wheel. But that really was, looking back retroactively, a cry for help. This moment for Richard Sherman right now is a cry for help. And there's a lot of elements, and we're just starting peeling back this layer of this onion in terms of all the issues at play. But just on my first lap, I want people to understand that there are some things going on making a cocktail that Richard Sherman needs to diffuse, or else this could get tragic.
Well, we must ask the question, who is it that made the cocktail? Because we're not going to be able to diffuse the issues that Richard Sherman has, or I should say more appropriately, he's not going to be able to diffuse his own issues if we don't know who the handlers are. Who are the puppeteers? Who's creating the scenery in Richard Sherman's life?
Ongoing here, but a lot of that happens when I talk to you on this show about nuanced topics, because we go places that I don't see other places and networks go, and I don't see other individuals go.
I like this show, but both these guys spend too much time patting themselves on the back.
When you play a character, it's hard to get out of character.
Agreed.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And particularly
Yes.
if you are simply playing a character. Well, a friend of mine, he was the star of the first Purge. My dog, Alon Noel.
Okay.
He was a star in the first Purge, and if any of y'all have ever...
Very entertaining movie. I always intended to actually do an evaluation of that film. I saw it, I think, back in 2018. That was when they had a lot of the quote-unquote racial undertones, or really overtones in that film, due to the quote-unquote first purge that they decided to initiate on a so-called black community. I'm trying to remember where it took place. Was it in Brooklyn, Staten Island? One of those places. But Yolanda Noel, he played like the drug kingpin of the community, and he protected the projects from a lot of quote-unquote white supremacists who were taking advantage of the concept of the first purge to try to initiate a race war against the so-called blacks who lived in that neighborhood. Very entertaining film.